This is part of Foundations of Data Visualization. I'm Stephen King from the University of North Carolina. We're going to be talking about data basics and finding the story in data, and then the different types of formats that we'll be using, and then a lot of the kind of working in Excel with a data set, including a little bit of visualization in Excel, and then how do we get it from Excel into our web applications. So let's jump in. You're working on a story and you might think, I want to do a story about all the DUIs in our area. So you're going to go find some data and you're going to do that, and while that might be a good idea, let's see if we can think about that in a little bit different way. So a better thought might be, how many DUIs are there in our area? And who are they? Who is getting these DUIs? That's a little bit more interesting, and it's a little bit different way of approaching it by saying how many, and we're not trying to prove that there's a problem, but to actually find out, is there a problem, and then see what's there. So we would go look for that data. When we find that data and assume that it's the accurate data, we want to let the data drive the story. We don't want to try to make a point or find data to make our point. This is contrary to everything you've done in your educational career going up to this point. So most of the time you come up with a hypothesis, you make an outline for your research paper, you go look for resources to try to find that, and you're trying to find resources to make your point. Well, what we want to do is to actually find the points from the data and then write our story or visualize our story in a way that represents that accurately. So to start, first we have to clean it up. Most of the time, data is messy. It has misspellings, it's got lots of different ways of doing it, there's lots of different ways of saying the same thing, there's bad numbers, good numbers, there could be poor formulas written into your Excel spreadsheet, there could be a lot of things that make it messy, and so we want to try to understand what's there and make sure we can clean that up. So most importantly, to do that, we've got to know what we have, what data is out there, what is sitting in front of us, what's in our Excel spreadsheet, and then what does it mean, how can we clean it up? So let's look at one example. UNC. There are a lot of different ways of saying UNC. The University of North Carolina, the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, at Chapel Hill. You can see how it goes. And then my favorite at the very bottom, only the New York Times would do U.N.C. Oh, wait, actually, I left off the third period there. So there's two other ways because we have a misspelling. So we want to be able to deal with that. I'm going to show you in Excel how we can refine and clean that up. So once we've cleaned things up, then we want to look for ways to quantify. So what are some of the mathematical things we can use to see what's there? Is there things that are that can be helpful? Sums, counts, averages, what all is out there. But I want to give a word of caution. Sometimes averages can be misleading, so make sure you do understand what you're doing. And is it the mean? Is it the median, the mode? All those different things. Think back to your high school math classes and make sure that you are presenting those things well. Step 3, we know what we've got. We've cleaned it up a little bit. Let's interview the data and see what's really there. So how many of X happened? How many things happened in there? Does this compare well with other statistics? Are there other data sets that we might need? What's the most, what's the least, kind of doing some sorting and kind of seeing the top and the bottom, the range, the minimums, the maximums. If there is people or groups of people or places, who is this happening to, and then trying to think about why that might be happening, that information might be in there. And then understanding, is this a trend or is it an anomaly? A trend versus an anomaly, both can be news. Both can be interesting. And I already mentioned geography, but where is something happening is a very important piece. So we ask all these questions of the data, and then we want to try to visualize those answers. So I like to do some quick and simple things. I call it pre-visualization. I use Excel most of the time. If I'm working in Google Spreadsheets, I might use a Fusion table. But I want to see what are the different ways I could visualize this data and then show it in a completely different way I might not have thought about. So I'll make multiple graphs to see if I can figure that out. And when we move to Excel, I'll show you how to do that. all of those things lead me up to figuring out what the story is, and then now I need to actually tell that story. So first of all, I want to be sure that I know what I have and what's missing. What data was not included? Why was it not included? Am I missing something because I didn't do the research, or is the person who provided the data to me, did they leave something out? One of my favorite examples was told, I heard it at a conference when an LA Crimes, so the Los Angeles Times was working on a crime application, and they had the local police records exported for all the violent crimes. And they looked at it and saw that there were no rapes. So they start to dig a little bit and thought, that's interesting, no rapes reported. So they called to find out what happened, and sure enough, the only reason it was left out was the person who ran the report thought that rapes were not a violent crime. Now, there's a lot to be said about that particular assumption, but that assumption had an impact on the data, and had the LA Times gone with that without asking that question of why is it, there's serious problems there. So you want to make sure that you're asking the right questions and knowing what you have and what might not be there. It's always helpful if you can get multiple sources that can help you make sure you have an accurate picture of what's really going on. You may not have multiple sources for every single year or every single state or county, but you might be able to find some single sources that you can compare against to give you that chance. And it's always good to get a second opinion. And at the Washington Post, we always had lots of people, multiple people, worked into the system to have copy editors and others who were not involved in the story to look at our data visualizations, to look at what we thought our points were, and make sure we're interpreting things right. That second opinion might also be an expert. You need to know that as a journalist, we're really smart, but we may not know everything. We might not know everything in the medical field, and so we might need to bring in a doctor to help us interpret that data. So don't be afraid to ask the real expert in that particular field. And then once you have it, go and take it as far as it can. When I say run with the story, I mean take that data and then ask more questions. Find new people. Find people that represent that data and turn it into a true story. One big note of caution, and this is very important. Correlation does not equal causation. Just because two things correlate doesn't mean that it is the reason or the cause for the problem. So, for example, the number of people who drowned while swimming in a swimming pool also correlates to power generated by the U.S. nuclear power plants. All right, those have nothing to do with each other, but as you can see on a graph, they look like they do. So we want to be very careful at what assumptions we make. And then here's one of my favorite. People who drowned after falling out of a fishing boat correlates with the marriage rate in Kentucky. So just a quick caution, correlation is not always causation. Now, we can get data in lots of forms. In this class, we're going to do a lot with data.gov. We might be working with the North Carolina official statistics, and you might be getting those sources from other places. Your source might give it to you in an Excel spreadsheet. They might give it to you as a CSV. You might find XML, JSON, HTML, and then different delimited forms of that in a text file. And so you need to be able to deal with those, and I'm going to show you the different ways of importing some of those. So let's go ahead and jump right into Excel.